Oliver?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, short background. We have a real estate brokerage here in San Diego. We have over 1,000 agents throughout the state. We have a couple franchise locations inside and outside the state, and have a little bit of a different business model, 100% commission style structure. And then we have a few businesses on the outside of that, like an escrow and different property management, transaction coordinating, things like that.
Okay.
All right, we're ready. Let's do it. All right. Well, very excited to have Matt Cox on the show. One of the most wanted men in real estate for many years, for a very, we'll call it successful mortgage fraud operation. You did some time behind bars. You've managed to figure out how to create identities and all these different things, and your story is absolutely fascinating, and I'm excited to jump into it with you. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
On that note, kind of the where I like to start with everyone is just kind of how they got initially into the game of real estate to start with.
I mean, how did I get involved in real estate? I graduated high school. I graduated college with a degree in fine arts. So, there's not much you could do with that. Um, at least at that time. So I ended up working like construction. I was working construction, and I was dating a chick. I'm gonna say chick. I was dating this woman. This girl. She was a chick. I was dating this chick, and she was she was a stripper that had gotten a job and was now working as a loan officer for a company called Eagle Lending, which did subprime loans in Florida. And she'd met one of the owners of the business while she was stripping. So it tells you, the mortgage industry right there. Like, you meet a stripper and you think she'd make a great loan officer. Now, look, in her defense, she was actually graduating in a few months and had actually stripped and gotten a degree in finance from the University of South Florida. So, it is a cliche, but, sometimes it's just true. And so she started working there. She graduated. And when she was just before she graduated, she was like, listen, you got to come do this. You'd be great at this. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to, do that. Like, I don't know anything about finance. I have a degree in fine arts. And she's like, no, I'm telling you, all it is sales. She's at sales and putting things together. She's like, you're super smart. You can do this. You'd be great at it. So I was really barely making my bills. So I went ahead and just, took a shot because I was basically going to go under at some point anyway. I was basically one bad financial decision away from, just the whole thing kind of crumbling, barely able to make my car payment, my mortgage, the whole thing. So I went and worked there, and I went into a training class for like, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 days. And then I went to, it was in, I think, North Carolina, came back, started originating loans. And the very first loan I did was, had fraud in it. Like, I went into my manager's office. I was about to send the file off to underwriting. She looked at the file. She was flipping through the file, pulled one document out, set it to the side. If this is basically mortgage brokers, it was a verification of rent. Put it to the side, closed the file, said it looks great, but verification, or your borrower has been 30 days late on her rent in the last 2 years. And I was like, oh wow, like that was a deal killer. So I was like, well, man, what am I going to do? And she said, well, what I would do if I was you, she said, I'd white it out. And she actually pulled the bottle of white out and started shaking it and just handed it to me. And I was like, well, I could go to jail for that. I said, that's fraud. And she goes, no, you're not going to go to jail for it. She said, the worst that'll happen is if underwriting catches it, they'll, maybe you'll get fired, but nobody's going to call the FBI. And she said, trust me, I do stuff like this all the time. It's fine. And I was like, okay. So I whited it out, made a copy of the document, stuck it back in the file, sent it to underwriting. 3-4 days later, I got an approval. They said, hey, your loan's approved. Maybe 4 or 5 days after that, we closed. I got a check for $3,500. It was a lot of money back then. In Florida, that's a lot of money. $3,500 is a lot of money right now.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So you're dating someone that got into the mortgage business. They get you into the mortgage business with basically only a finance or fine arts degree as your background. And day one in the business, loan one, or we'll call it loan one, obviously not day one, but loan number one, they're telling you it just to go ahead and white out some things on the documents and
That's
push
fine.
it through.
Yeah, you're making it sound like a big deal. It's not,
Wow.
Yeah, it was yeah, I mean looking back it's like what was she thinking? What's this shit? Listen, it doesn't matter. She went to prison too. So and the chick that I was dating ended up the owner of the company left his wife for her. She left me, he left his wife. They got married. They ended up having a kid. They're happily married to this day. So from her perspective, it's a love story.
Small world.
Yeah, it's funny how things work out. And then anyway, I closed that loan, and then the next loan that came in, the guy, I don't know what it was. He made like 45,000, but if he made like 49,000, he could, his debt to income ratio worked. At 45, it didn't. So, I whited out. I changed the 45 to 49 or 52 or whatever it was. I gave him a little boost. He only needed a little boost. And that loan went through. I was thrilled. Next person, something else. They didn't have their down payment for 90 days. Their down payment wasn't in the bank or something. I changed some bank statements. Then I started making canceled checks. Remember canceled checks where like, you could just give them the canceled check, the front and the back of the check. You just make a copy and you hand it to them. And I was making those. What else? So I was doing that for a while. That company, so I closed 4 loans my first month and 6 the next month. Then it was 8. Then it was 10. Then it was 12. Then they made me a manager.
And how many of those are you faking stuff on?
Like almost all of them.
All of them. So this is business as usual for you, day one in the mortgage business.
Yeah, it got to the point. So basically, that company gets closed down. And and so I end up opening my own mortgage company. I basically took a bunch of files, went to another mortgage company, closed those files, and then a few months later opened my own company. And I would say I hired about a dozen guys. The loans that are coming through the door, like if they came to the door and I pre-qualified somebody, if they were like we were an FHA lender, a VA lender, and if you looked at them and said, okay, this is a solid customer, like they've got all their stuff, they're going to be okay. I just hand it to one of the brokers. Like I was so the bulk of what I did had fraud involved in it. I didn't necessarily trust the brokers to do fraud. I mean, not that they were doing plenty of fraud, but if it was a more complicated file, I was more interested in doing it myself.
Okay. So so you've kind of run the course with the first company. Now you've transitioned to owning the company. You open your own mortgage company. What happens from there?
I got married. We started buying a bunch of real estate. We got into like probably a couple $1 million worth of rental properties, duplexes, quadplexes, triplexes. Like there was one of them was a 10 unit. And so we ended up like 50 something, 55 rental units, something like that. And so everything was going okay, but I didn't close those loans through my company because a lot of times I would own that, or I own the company, and people knew I was married to my wife at the time. So we ran those through another company for somebody that used to work for me that had started their own company. And it was a friend. And so that company ended up getting raided by the FBI because they were running a straw man scam. And so they got raided, and then the owner told the FBI, look, the FBI, they cooperated, obviously to get a reduced sentence. And they said, look, I know a guy who's running a mortgage company. He's got a ton of fraud going through there. Matter of fact, we closed a bunch of loans for his wife, and they're all fake W-2s, fake pay stubs, fake everything. So they wore a wire and met me for lunch, and they said, look, our office got raided, and the FBI is asking questions about, your wife, you and your wife. And I was like, oh my God, you didn't tell them the W-2s were fake, did you? You didn't tell them that I verified her employment. You didn't tell her that the bank statements were fake. You didn't tell them that, I just buried myself on the wire.
Wow. You're saying all this while they're wired.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And I ended up realizing, of course, that I was at the time, at that moment, just based on the conversation, I was like, oh, wow, they're wired. So I said, hey, have the FBI agent just call me. And I got up and left. He called, didn't even pretend like they were like, it didn't happen. Literally, I got back. It was 20 minutes later. I get the phone call. Hey, so when do you want to come in? So I said, okay, I'll be in there I'll come in on Tuesday. And so I went instead. What I did was I got an attorney. My attorney called and said, he's not coming in. And he negotiated me to accept a 3 years probation.
So, and what year was this?
This was 2000 this was like 2001. But I don't think I pled guilty till 2002. But so a lot of things say like, oh, in 2002, but really it took a year before I actually went in and pled guilty. So 2001, the middle of 2001.
So, okay. So at that time, the money that you're making is from the loans that you're closing. You're using that money to build your real estate portfolio. As that continues to grow, then this wire situation happens.
Right.
Is that your first kind of like run in with the law?
Yeah, that was, I ended up, I couldn't own the mortgage company anymore.
After that. Okay.
Now I know this is coming, you're getting in trouble, you're going to plead guilty, but I'm still running the mortgage company at that time. So I realized, like, what am I going to do when I can't run this place? I did sell it to a friend of mine who was a CPA, and he basically kept me on. He gave me like $8,000 a month to keep me on as a consultant, but I was still kind of running the place. And I decided what I wanted to do was I wanted to start flipping houses. There was a really, really rundown area of town at that time called Ybor City. And you could buy a house in Ybor City for $50,000, $100,000. I mean, everything in Ybor City is now going for 200. The same houses I was selling are 200, 300,000. That's a lot for a house in Ybor City, right. In Florida in general. The average house in Florida, I think, is 350, 340. It's not California. So, yeah. So these houses were going, these are little shotgun houses going for 50,000. They're run down. The median price was like 100, maybe $150,000 in that area. So I thought, I'm going to go in, I'm going to start flipping houses. And the problem with flipping houses in that area is, if you buy the house and you dump 30,000 into it for repairs and it's worth 100, what are you going to make? 20? If you make 20, right. You might make 20. You might have to give the borrowers their down payment. You have to, the carrying costs, the whole thing. So what are you going to make? $20,000? I mean, there's just no real money there. So what I decided to do was, it was like, okay, if I could get these houses, they could only appraise at 100, maybe 150. And depending on the size of the house, some of the houses, obviously I'm buying for 75, 100,000, but it's like, there's just no money here. So I thought, how do I get these houses to appraise higher? And what I decided was, by this point, I'm divorced from my wife. She doesn't want to be married to a felon. So I'm divorced from my wife, and I said, I'm gonna start flipping houses. I was dating a chick that worked at a title company, and she said, I said, how can I get these houses to appraise higher? How can I get the comparable sales higher? And she went, well, I mean, I guess you could make them. I said, yeah, but how do I make them? Like, how can I record the sales higher? Like if I buy enough houses in this area, I can raise the value. And she was like, okay. She said, well, if you pay the extra dock stamps. So what I did was I started buying houses for, let's say I buy it for $100,000. I would just pay the extra $700 because you pay $700 for every $100,000. So I pay the extra $700,000 and it would be recorded at $200,000 instead of $100,000. So I'm buying houses for $50,000 and I'm paying the extra dock stamps and I'm getting them recorded at 200, 205, 190, 225.
Is that just because you're just entering that in as the value when you do that?
Yeah, you just write it, you just say the transaction went through for 200,000. And although when I bought it for 50, I paid $350 for the dock stamps, I'm just going to add an extra $1,050. So I add an extra, I just write a check and then I'd get them to let me bring it in to Hillsborough County and I'd hand deliver it. So I'd say, hey, yeah, just close on this. Here's the, and they'd go, oh, okay, thank you. And 10 days later, 12 days later, whatever, there's a lag time for recordings. So whatever it is, 10 days, 12 days later, whatever, a week, 2 weeks later, it would show up in public records. It'd say, hey, this house just closed. It was purchased for $200,000. Well, so I started buying those houses and doing that. And the other problem I had was I was like, okay, but who's going to buy these houses for $200,000 in an area that's selling for $100,000?
Right.
So it was like, I thought about doing a straw man scam. I thought I can get maybe some guy that's got good credit. If I give him half the money, if he makes a couple hundred, most people for a couple $100,000 will go ahead and ruin their credit. But like, give me $200,000, I'll trash my credit, right? Like they don't care. So I was like, yeah, but then I got to give him $200,000. I have to split the money with him, and I'm not interested in splitting the money with this guy. He hasn't done anything. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I should probably, if I just made my own investors, if I just started making synthetic identities. So you know what a synthetic identity is, right?
I'm guessing it's just like a fake social security number or something.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated, right?
Okay.
So I figured out how to get Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers to children that don't exist.
Okay.
I then got secured. So I would then apply online using that Social Security number. And I would use let's say I'd use a date of birth as I wouldn't say it was a 10-month-old kid. I would say his date of birth was for like a 33-year-old man. Then I'd apply online. I wouldn't get the credit cards. They'd say no, but I'd get secured credit cards. So I'd get 3 secured credit cards, make the payments. In 6 months, these guys had 700 credit scores. 705, 710. I mean, as long as you keep the balance below 30%, you make the payments on time. So the payments are 710, 705, 695. So got roughly 700 credit scores. You only needed a 620 to get an F8, I mean, a conventional loan at that time. So my guys are coming out of the gate 700. Provided that you had you were on your job for 2 years, you had 2 years residency, you had the down payment, But these guys
and that's a paper at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
So here's the thing.
Plus.
Right. So these guys have 700 credit scores. And like I said, you only needed 620.
Right.
So 700 credit scores, they've been on their job 2 years because by this point I've purchased several so I don't know how it is in California, but in Florida, well, a lot of states, you can, if you open a corporation and you don't pay the fees, it becomes inactive, correct? It's active if you're paying. If you're not, fine. Right. Then it's inactive. Well, in Florida, after 3 years of inactivity, you can buy that corporation. You can buy the it's inactive. So I can go in and I could pay the extra fees for that corporation. And I can change the name of the corporation. So I went and I started buying corporations that had been inactive for 7 years, 8 years, and then just change the name of it. So now I've got their tax ID number. I would create, let's say, a website for them, make W-2s, pay stubs. And so my borrowers, you could call the phone number of the corporation. You could check it, the tax ID number. Underwriting could check and see that it's been open for 7 years. This says he's on the job for 2 years. He's got W-2s and pay stubs. We called the corporation. Somebody answered. There's a website. Like, what else do we need? He works there for 2 years. We pulled his credit. He's got 705 credit scores.
Wow.
He's got a bank account. I started making online banks. So I started making banks that were like, I had one called the Bank of Ybor. It's like the bankofybor.com. You could go to it. I created a website, and it was the Bank of Ybor, and you could read about the bank. It's a small local bank that doesn't exist. I had monthly pay stubs I made. They were color monthly pay stubs. And you know what's great about this is doing this, you start to realize what they're verifying, because now I'm the bank. So I now know that if I actually print out the color statement and mail it in with the verification of deposit, underwriting typically would call me and say, oh my gosh, you mailed in the originals. And I'd go, huh? Do me a favor, stamp those as certified, true and correct certified copies, and then just mail those back to me. And they go, no problem. And they would never call the bank. Why would they? They have the originals. They saw the originals. Even if they did call, I'd verify it. You know, somebody would answer, we'd call back, or they'd answer. It was go to a cell phone or, whatever, pick it up, and you say, hi, Bank of Ybor, how may I help you? Hi, I'm so-and-so calling from such and such. Okay, sure. Hold on a second. And I do the whole, I put them on hold, of course. We got to get you, hold on. Let Sally needs to talk to you. And I'd have my secretary come and do it, or my girlfriend or somebody. We'd type and we'd look it up, and okay, I can't verify the exact amount, but if you tell me, I can, I can't. Oh, well, it's 18,000, around 8. Yeah, that's about right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We're good. Ready to close. So, it's funny how many times they would call to verify your employment after the loan had closed. Like 4 days later, a week later, they're calling to verify somebody's employment. I'm thinking, that closed on Monday. Like, what if I said he doesn't work here?
Yeah.
Anyway, so, I started doing that. I built these synthetic identities, figured out how to get fake IDs in their name, started opening up bank accounts in their names, buying the houses in their names, recording the value, the sale of the houses, and higher level, at much higher. Each guy bought about 5, sometimes 6 houses. And so now you've got a house that you bought for $50,000. Now I don't have to do any renovations. I just have to get somebody to clean up the outside of the house, maybe even paint the roof, trim the trees, mow the yard, call the appraiser. He comes out, he takes a look at it. Even if he said, even if I couldn't get the guy to say, that the house was in great shape, if he wanted to go inside and he said, oh man, this thing's gutted inside, or it looks horrible inside, it's beat to hell, and he put a bunch of deferred maintenance, it didn't matter, because I'd ordered the appraisal software and I just retyped the entire appraisal, and I'd remove the deferred maintenance, because that's the kind of guy I am, Oliver. That's the type of thing I do. So what ends up happening, you know what I love about mortgage brokers and loan officers that watch this, that like half of them will be going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And the other half will be saying, this person's despicable. I'm good with either.
I mean, it's an incredible story either way you look at it.
So it's much funner to tell it than it was at the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did that. I bought, how many houses did I buy? So the FBI said I bought 109 houses. I don't think that's true. I don't remember 109 houses. I think that's an exaggeration. I think they added a bunch of just personal transactions that I was involved in, buying houses. You buy 2 or 3 houses and you just sell them right away. Within 2 or 3 weeks, you just flip them. You didn't do anything to them. So they're including those types of things. Regardless, I borrowed $11.5 million in these synthetic identities names. Another thing that people find funny is, have you ever seen the movie Reservoir Dogs?
I have.
So the names of the character, or the names of the synthetic identities, one of them was named Lee Black, one was Michael White, one was James Red, one was Brandon Green, one was David Silver. And so in those names, I borrowed, like I said, $11.5 million. And so once I get that house, and the appraisal and the W-2s and pay stubs that and the bank accounts and everything else that's verified, so I can provide reserves, everything. You send it in, underwriting comes back. They say, well, look, we'll give you 180,000 or 195,000 or whatever it may be. And even, they could send their appraiser out, like, yeah, do a drive-by appraisal, no problem. The comparable sales are there.
Right,
One's
because you've
across the street.
inflated them all.
Yeah, exactly. One's a block away, one's 2 blocks away, they're all over the place. From the street, they look amazing. You drive by, you pull up, you take a photo, he gets back in. He's like, this is insane. But the nice thing is the houses that we're selling at a much lower price didn't look as good. These have brand new paint jobs. These look like it's urban renewal. And these are great houses. The houses that are selling for 50 and 70 and 80, they look like crap. So anyway, I refinance these houses. I'm pulling out cash. It's fine. I get caught a few times. I give the money back. A couple of banks caught me. They scream, they holler. This person doesn't exist. You don't exist. We're going to call the FBI. And I just was like, let me just give the money back. So, we don't have to call anybody. Don't get crazy. You're about to lose a bunch of money. And I'd explain to them that you understand, you think you've got a house that's worth 200,000 and you've lent 180. But the truth is you have a house that's worth about 40 or 50 grand. And by the time you get it back, the crackheads will have moved in. They'll have stripped the entire thing for all the copper. They'll have knocked out the windows. It'll be gone. You'd be lucky to get 30 grand. And I'd even explain to them what I did. This is what I did. Look at the comparable sales. Look at the names. Black, silver, blue. You lent to a guy named James Red. They'd be like, Jesus, God almighty. And so what they would do is they'd just say, do you have the money? Yeah, I give the money. I'd mail them a check for 150,000 back. So they get their money back. When I was eventually caught by the Secret Service and interviewed, FBI Secret Service said none of them ever called. Nobody ever called.
How many times did that happen?
That happened probably 3 or 4 times. One time when I owned the mortgage company, we got caught by a company out of Chicago called Pinnacle Bank Corp. They caught us with roughly $2 million in fraud. One of my brokers had been using the same set of canceled checks for all of his borrowers, and they put it together. And all they said was, listen, they said, do me a favor. This is the owner of the company. He said, do me a favor. Look, I'm not going to call the FBI, because he said the truth is they'd already sold like $1 million worth to Household Bank. And he said, we'd have to buy that $1 million back. He said, wow. So, and then the $1 million that they caught before they sold them, they said, we're just going to go ahead and sell them to Household Bank. He said, just promise me if any of these come back on me, you'll help me get rid of them. Because they're out of Chicago. They're not in Florida. And I said, absolutely. Of course. Of course. What am I going to say?
So he was just covering his own ass, and that worked out in your favor in that instance.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, crazy. Listen, I got caught one time. We had sold, I don't know what it was. It's funny because I have like in my book, I have all the exact numbers, right? Like I have my Freedom of Information Act. And all the stuff from the government. So I have the exact numbers of what the dollar amounts are, the names of the lenders, like everything. But I had done like 6 duplexes, 6 owner-occupied duplexes. So one person bought 6 duplexes the same day. All 6 of them were owner-occupied. All 6 of them went to a different lender. So every one of them went to somebody else. But one of them sold. One of them, we didn't realize, had a credit line with like Washington Mutual. So Washington Mutual a month later calls me up and says that one of their lawyer calls me up and says, listen, we got 2 owner-occupied duplexes. One was on a credit line. One we did. I was like, oh, that sounds like a typo. That sounds like, whew. Yeah, that's an issue. What are you going to do about that? They were like, we're going to call the FBI if you don't fix this. So I convinced them to let us refinance those 2 duplexes and pay us another broker fee. And they gave us a short sale, by the way. They reduced it by like $15,000 or $16,000 just to get, because what are they going to do? They're not going to call. They don't want to call the FBI. Wow. You don't want the FBI. Washington Mutual does not want the FBI going through their files.
Yeah.
So, anyway, this whole thing was fine, and it was going okay. And then at some point, a friend of mine who was also running a scam got somebody just realized something was wrong. And honestly, the quick version is this: she went into a closing with a fake ID. It was her picture on the ID, her picture, and the title agent looked at the ID and said, "Something's not right." She said, "This doesn't look like you," but it was her. It was her. She showed another employee the ID. The woman said, "It's her. That looks like her." And she says, "No, something's not right. I'm not going to give you the check. Let me make a few phone calls. I'll let you know." And she signed all the documents. Anyway, we had already closed another loan, and we had a check for like $100,000 or something for a refi. And she wanted to deposit it, and I said, "Absolutely not. This woman's she's gonna make some phone calls. The whole thing's gonna come unraveled. They're gonna come. We're not depositing that check." And she insisted she wanted to deposit it. So I had a buddy of mine who was working with me on another scam. He had a bank account. So she said, "Let's have him deposit the bank account, the check." So he said, "Yeah, no problem." We explained what happened. He said, "Yeah, it's no problem. I'll do it." And he was like, "What do you think?" I said, "I think we need to walk away." But then again, I've got a ton of money. This girl had no money. So she's looking at $100,000 check. Like, that's 50 grand for her. And so I'm saying, let's just start over. Let's walk away from this whole situation. We'll start something else. And she's like, "No, it'll take months." No. So she gives him the check. His name was Travis. Travis deposits the check. A couple days later, the bank manager calls him and says, "Listen, because the check's over $100,000, we need to witness your endorsement. It's just bank policy." And he said, "Okay, no problem." Now, I've deposited many, many checks for over 100,000. I've never, ever required, the bank has never required me seeing
to come in and sign it.
Right. And so I told him, "Don't go in. I think something's wrong. They're going to be waiting for you." And he went and he said, "Nah, there's no police here. I'm at the bank now. Like, there's no cops here." I was like, "Listen, bro, they're not going to be sitting around in cruisers." But he knew, he knows everything. And so he went inside, he got arrested. And I bonded him out the next day. And I got him an attorney. And look, listen, it was a local charge. It wasn't even federal. I paid for his attorney, and his attorney was like, "Look, you might have to do a little bit of time. Can you pay the money back?" "Yeah, we can pay the money back." So, but in the end, it doesn't matter. By that point, he was already working with the task force. So he realized, sitting in jail, yeah, I can't do this. He has a daughter. He's not interested in going to prison for me. So he started working with the local authorities. They put together a task force. They start investigating me. Maybe 3 months later, keep in mind, I'm still committing fraud. 3 months later, a friend of mine who's a sheriff's deputy comes into my office, walks in. He says, "Hey, Matt, can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure, what's up?" He said, "I used to date a woman that works for the Tampa Police Department." I said, "Okay." He said, "She was working on a task force recently that was just handed over to the FBI." I said, "Okay." He said, "My name came up. His name came up because I had actually sold him some properties." I was like, "Okay." He said, "The task force was on you."
Oh.
And I, it was like, ooh. And he said, "They're coming." She said that you're on federal probation. She knew you were on federal probation. She said not to talk to you anymore, not to go around you anymore, that they were probably going to come arrest you in a couple days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So that's when the heat started really coming. Is that at that point?
Yeah, roughly. Yes. Now, I immediately, I also started getting phone calls from a reporter from the Tampa Tribune. I'm sorry, from the St. Petersburg Times. And I had also about that same time around the same time I'd gotten a phone call from the girl that I used to date at the title company. She said their records had been subpoenaed. She said, we're not supposed to call you or tell you, but they came and she said they weren't even all your records. She said a lot of them were your investors. My investors? You mean Mr. Green? You
Yeah,
mean
green,
Mr.
black,
Red?
and blue.
It's like, oh, that's not good.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so I stayed and, explained to the FBI what happened. And no, that's not what happened at all. I actually took off on the run. I said, oh, okay. So I ran up my credit cards. I pulled as much money out of the bank as I possibly could in a day. Cause this was a Thursday at like 4:00. So the next day between that, the remaining part of the day and the next day, I was only able to get out like 80,000 in cash. You just can't go into a bank and say, hey, give me 300,000. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I had to get people to go in and cash checks. I had to pull money out of ATMs. I'm driving around. Most I could get was about 80 grand. So I got 80 grand. I ran up all my credit cards, bought a bunch of, computers, anything that I could think of that I might need. I bought a new Audi and I drove with the girl I was dating at the time. I drove to, Atlanta, Georgia. But we didn't have very much money. I made a fake ID. I ended up renting a property by a guy named Michael Shanahan. And this was in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is like a suburb of Atlanta.
So you basically just took as much cash as you could get and went on the run.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's what I do. It's what anybody would do.
Okay. So you make another fake ID and now you're in Georgia.
Yeah. With the girlfriend.
With a girlfriend.
That I've known a month.
Is she an accomplice? Does she
that
aware
I've known her? I've known her a month.
Okay. Wow.
And I tell her exactly, this is what's happening. See ya. And she says, I'm coming with you. I love you. I'm in love with you. I was like, that's insane. We don't even know each other. But she insisted she wanted to go. It was really, honestly, probably out of a series of really, really bad decisions, that may have very well been the worst one, was bringing her. She was bipolar. She was a lunatic. I did not know her. It's funny too, because, in the course of this, she seemed like a really sweet girl, but in the course of this, she tells me the only reason she had just moved to Florida from Las Vegas, and she moved to Florida from Las Vegas because she'd been caught embezzling money from her boss, who's a lawyer, and he didn't call the police when he found out she'd stolen like 30 grand from him. He didn't call the police because he'd been sleeping with her and didn't want his wife to find out. So instead, he gives her like 10 grand to leave.
Wow.
So it really, in a way, it was like, wow, honestly, you're really perfect to come with me, So I thought, yeah, she's, she made a strong case. So I was like, all right, come on. So we packed up our stuff. We took off. We went to Atlanta. In Alpharetta, we rented a place his house was worth about a couple $100,000. Nice house, brand new house. Once again, it's not California. $200,000 house here is like a $1.5 million house there. I mean, it's a decent house in a suburb. Nice house. It's probably about 2,200 square feet.
And at this point, you're under a new name, new alias, new
alias. By this point, I started getting around this time, I started getting IDs in the name of homeless people.
Okay.
Don't judge me, bro. Don't judge me.
Yeah. So A, how did you do that? And B, how are you figuring out all of these things, like doing the fake IDs and all these little intricacies that you've had to figure out along the way that I'm guessing are not just like a Google search away?
No, especially not then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this is 2004.
Okay.
So, like making the birth certificates, I just went and got my birth certificate and I looked at it and I said, okay, this is on security paper. So I'm going to need security paper. So I order security paper. Then I figure, okay, well, I'm going to need a seal. I'm going to need that like a raised seal. So I find out you can't just order a government seal. Apparently they won't let you do that. So I had to come up with a name that sounded similar, like the, instead of the South Carolina Office of Vital Statistics, I had to put, Corporation of South Carolina Vital Records. No, Virtual Records. Yeah, Virtual Records Corporation of South Carolina. That's what it was. And so, and then I use that to do the seal. And the seal's beat up. You can't see a seal. You can really just feel it. So then I got the template. I used the template. I could put any name I wanted in. When I got the social, them to order me to issue me a social security number. You have to come in with a birth certificate. You have to come up with a shot record. So I figured out what a shot record looked like. I filled out a shot record. I came in, I show them the shot record. I show them the birth certificate. The person at Social Security goes on the computer, looks and says, oh, wow, you're right. This child has never had a social security number issued. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And they're like, okay, well, here, let me go ahead and issue one. And bam, they'd issue one. 10 days later, I'd get a card in the mail with the number.
And are you saying that it's for you, or are you saying that it's for your child?
It's for my daughter, or it's for my son.
Got it.
And when I started using the driver's licenses of homeless people, it's not like Matt Cox has 50 kids.
Yeah.
I start using fake. I start once I started doing the homeless people. So what I did was one day we were trying to figure out. We're talking, and I'm like, man, we got to start getting like driver's licenses, because if I get pulled over by the cops, my little fake ID is not going to pass mustard. A title company, sure. A bank, yeah, pretty much. I'm giving them money. They're not looking too hard. But a cop, he's going to run it. So, we were sitting at a stoplight one day, and I remember the girl I was with, her name was Becky. Becky goes, so what? She was like people in insane asylums, like she was people that are incarcerated. I said, come on, what, they could have warrants. What if they still have warrants? What if they, and I looked over and there was a guy standing there holding a will work for food sign. And I went, oh, I go, like that guy. She's the bum. And I went, the bum. I mean, you're in California, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Residentially challenged. So yeah, this homeless guy, and I look at him and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, he's perfect. So I pull over, I go over and I walk up to him. I said, hey man, can I ask you some questions? I give you $20 right now. He goes, yeah, what's up? I give him the $20. I said, look, how long have you been homeless? Do you have any felonies? Have you ever been arrested? You ever been in the military? Do you have a driver's license? Is it suspended? What states have you had driver's licenses in? Have you ever had a passport? Do you receive Social Security disability? Do you have any government aid? When was the last time you were employed? Do you plan on being employed anytime in the future? Where do you live? Do you have an address? Can you get mail? Listen, bro. Like I asked, and I remember he said, the first guy looked at me and he goes, man, are you taking a survey or something? And I go, you get a lot of surveyors? And he goes, sometimes. And I went, really? He goes, well, yeah. He said, like people from homeless shelters,
like community outreach type stuff. Yeah.
He said they'll come out here. They'll ask us a bunch of questions. They write down stuff. They're like kind of surveys. And I was like, nice. So I immediately went and I wrote up what I called a federal statistical survey form. It was 17 questions. And got myself a clipboard, printed out a bunch of them, made a badge that said statistical survey for the Salvation Army, pinned the badge on myself, and went back out and started looking for guys that were in their early 30s.
And you're basically, the survey is like a loan application.
Yeah, exactly. The survey is, well, really, it's an application to see if you're a viable person to have their identity stolen, or whatever you want to call it. So I would, once I got their information, where was your mother? What's your mother's maiden name? Where were you? What county and state were you born in? And if they were good, then I would go ahead and I'd go online and I would go to wherever the county was that they were born, and I would print out a copy of an application to borrow an application for a duplicate birth certificate. And I'd fill that out, and I'd get myself a little money order. I'd make a fake ID, make a copy of it, and I'd mail it in. They told me everything. They told me where they were born, mother's maiden name. And it doesn't matter anyway. If you pay the $22 or $35, whatever they're charging to get a certified copy, if you pay that money and you've got some of the questions right, you're going to get it. I think out of probably 40 of them that I mailed in, I might not have gotten one or two.
So now you're getting all these birth certificates. Yeah. You have all of their information.
I get their birth certificates. I get a copy of their social security card. I would get a copy of their high school transcripts. I get a copy of their driving record, even if their license was suspended. I would then go to a state where they'd never had a driver's license. I'd register to vote in their name. I would make I would get they call them UPS boxes. UPS boxes now, but back then it was mailboxes, etc. You're old enough to remember mailboxes.
I remember those, for sure.
So I'd get a mailboxes, etc. Box, and I would write a lease, and I go into the local DMV with all my documents, tell them I just moved to the area, just rented a place a couple months ago, lost my driver's license. I need an ID real quick. And they'd look me up, and they'd come back and say, yeah, stand over there. I'd pay used to be $20 or something, $25 for a driver's license, pay the $25, and I'd get a driver's. They'd issue me an ID or a driver's license, whatever I wanted. I've had IDs. I've had 27 driver's licenses in 7 different states.
Wow.
I've had 24 passports because I'd always turn around and I'd go get a passport. So, and I've traveled to Greece, Italy, Croatia, Jamaica, Mexico, Bermuda, all on fake passports.
That's unbelievable.
So the guy that I had rented the house from in Atlanta, I opened up a few bank accounts, and I satisfied the loan on his house. So, when you get a loan from Bank of America, let's say, for $200,000, you pay it for 30 years, or maybe you pay it for 10 years. When Bank of America gets paid off, what do they file with public records to notify public records to release the lien? They file a satisfaction of mortgage or a release of lien. So I filled out this, I manufactured this 1-page document that said it was a, Bank of America satisfaction of lien or satisfaction of mortgage or release of lien, whatever the county typically required or state typically required. I just go find one in public records from Bank of America, and I'd just copy it. And I'd say, the mortgage taken out at this time by this person, for this amount is hereby, satisfied. And then I'd put down the bank president's name or, by this authorized, signer for whatever Bank of America. And I'd sign it, and I'd have it witnessed, and I'd notarize it. I get a notary stamp. I had a couple dozen of those. So I'd notarize it, and then I'd go down and I'd file it. So this guy, Michael Shanahan, had 2 Bank of America mortgages. He had a first mortgage and he had like a HELOC. So I satisfied those. So now I'm living in this house that's worth about $200,000, and I ended up making an ID as Michael Shanahan, saying I'm Michael Shanahan. I live in his house. So I then called 3 hard money lenders. I had one come out at 1 o'clock, one comes out at 4, one comes out the next day. They all say, wow, this house is worth $200,000. What do you want? And I said, I want $150,000. And they were like, okay, well, I'll give you $150,000. I go, okay. I closed all 3 of those loans maybe a week or so later, borrowed roughly $400,000, put the money in the bank, and pulled the money out of the bank.
That's crazy. So you're living in this guy's house, figured out a way to make it look like his loan had been fully paid off. Then, since you are not only living in his house, but also have his ID with your picture on it and all of that, now you're able.
By the way, didn't even have his real name. Like, I had a different middle name because I couldn't find his real middle name, and I had a different date of birth.
Wow.
They still lent me the money. They were hard money lenders. They're mostly concerned
They
about.
don't check as much for sure.
Yeah.
And then instead of just calling one and doing that, you did 3 all at the same time. So I'm guessing none of them knew about each other, and now you're able to triple up
Right.
the money that you're able to get.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Scumbag move, right?
Wow. And
Total
then
scumbag move. I mean, I feel bad about it. They're fine. They got
Michael Shanahan is left holding the bag.
Yes, he
basically.
was. He was left holding the bag, and he was very upset about it. He's a CPA, owned his own CPA firm, and came to my sentencing, said that he had to hire an attorney, and it cost him about $7,000 to get it fixed. So I owe that money too. When I eventually took off, he basically one day he hadn't received the rent. So, after like a week, and he'd been receiving the rent. So it was like, this is nuts. Like, so he swung by the house and grabbed the mail out of the mailbox and saw a bunch of letters to him. So he started opening them and realized that they were like loan payments to him. Hey, here's your mortgage payment. Hey, here's a copy of your closing statement. Hey, here's a copy of it. He's like, what the fuck? So he calls the local cops, and then the Secret Service got involved. And the Secret Service, came and talked to him, and I wasn't being careful. Like, I was already wanted, so it's not like I was trying to wipe down my fingerprints or not have so it was very easy. They just ran my prints, and they said, hey, this is the guy. He's already wanted out of Florida. The FBI is looking for him in Florida. The U.S. Marshals are looking for him because he was on federal probation, and he took off. And now the Secret Service was involved. The problem is the Secret Service genuinely wanted to catch me. The FBI were perfectly happy putting a warrant out for my arrest and waiting for me to get picked up. But the FBI was actively sending out flyers. They're emailing title companies, lenders, banks. They
warning people about you.
Yeah, they ran, and the local news stations were doing. But by that point, I'd moved. I was living in South Carolina. By the time they showed up, I was in South Carolina.
So you basically got those 3 loans and then left? Was that?
Well, yeah. If you stick around, they throw you in jail.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And the owner just happened to pop by the property, which is when he found all that mail, and then raised.
Well, he popped by because I hadn't paid the rent.
Okay, because you were gone.
I was gone.
Right.
I'm not paying the rent. I'm leaving. This thing's done.
I
did leave the Audi. I left my Audi at the local police precinct, and yeah, we left the Audi there. By that point, we had alternative identities, and so I went to Charlotte, and we bought some new cars and moved into a really nice condo downtown.
And are these off of the homeless people's IDs that you had manufactured?
Well, I also was running, listen, it's funny because it's not like it's one thing. I'm also running ads to take mortgage applications, home loans available, good credit, bad credit, no problem, free applications, call now.
So you're running ads, acting like you're a loan officer again, basically.
Yes. So people call up, I take an application on them. And then, if they met, my requirements, I would keep that application. And then what I did was, with the applications I would get, I would then call a local lender or a local broker, and I would say, hey, I'm an app, we run applications. We have extra applications. These people need phone calls. Can you call them? And then we would just send them over. I would send them over the applications, and then they would call those people back. So the people get a phone call back, and they may have even closed a loan, but I'm just the middleman collecting the data.
You siphon the data in the middle.
Right. And let's say you take 10 applications, maybe one person ends up meeting their correct criteria. So so at that point, I actually was living in Charlotte as a guy named Michael Eckert. but I changed his name to Michael Johnson. I got a lawyer and I legally changed his name to Michael Johnson. I got a new ID in that name, plus a social security. Don't laugh, bro. Don't laugh. It's not funny.
It's not funny at all. It's just the creativity
and horrible
and ballsiness is just unbelievable.
Oh, listen, I look back and I think it does, at the time, it didn't seem that nuts. You walk into a bank. I'll give you an example. One time I walked into a bank to cash a cashier's check. It was to cash a check for $29,000. It's too long to get into the particulars, but it was $29,000. And typically I would never go higher than 8 or 9,000, right? Like you don't want to go over 10. But I was getting frustrated. I wanted to leave. And so I was like, look, I got a check for $29,000. I'm just going to cash it. So I went to a cash bank. There's some banks that hold more cash than others. So I went to a SunTrust bank. I think it was SunTrust. And I go in there and I give them my ID. It's a real ID in the name of Michael Cugno. Cashier's check is written out to Michael Cugno. Now, the cashier says I can't cash this. You have to talk to the manager. I said, I was told that you guys had the cash. She goes, I know, but the manager has to approve it. Manager comes, he talks to me. He says, well, why are you getting $29,000 out of the bank? And I was like, I said, well, I explained to him that, he goes, why don't you deposit in your own bank? I said, my bank's in Florida. Back then, I said, you guys are going to put a hold on it. Like, I'm not doing all that. I need the money. He goes, well, why? I said, I cash people's checks. I work for a construction company, and we have day laborers, and we write them checks, and we typically cash them. And, so he goes, yeah, okay, that makes sense. He leaves. He comes back. He asks another question. I answer the question. My girlfriend is in the car calling me every 5 minutes. What's going on? And I'm like, the guy's being a jerk. He didn't want to give me the money. She's always, get out of the bank, get out of the bank. And I'm like, I'm not leaving the bank. He's got a cashier's check for $29,000. He's got my ID. It's a real ID issued by Alabama in the name Scott Cugno. I have multiple credit cards in the name Scott Cugno. I have a bank account in the name Scott Cugno. I have a social security card. Like, I'm Scott Cugno. And he's got all my stuff. If I run out of the bank, he's going to call the police. And if I say, oh, just give me my stuff back. No, I want my money. So he goes, he comes back, he asks another question. I answer it again. Then he goes back, he comes back, and I said, hey man, what's taking so long? He goes, well, it's $29,000. We have to call, we have to verify stuff. He said, we're trying right now. He said that the check was issued from a bank that did a closing for a guy by the name of Michael Shanahan. And I'm like, right. And he said, we're trying to get a hold of Michael Shanahan. And I was like, oh, okay. And I thought, oh my God. And I'm sitting there like, okay. And my phone rings. And I pick up the phone. I don't recognize the number. The only person that even has the number is the girl sitting in the car, Becky. So the phone rings, but I pick it up and I go, hello? And this woman says, hi, this is Kimberly from SunTrust Bank. Is this Michael Shanahan? And I said, yes, it is. And she said, Mr. Shanahan, we have someone in the bank trying to cash a large check. This was a cashier's check that was drawn on your bank account. We'd like to know if you can verify the amount. I said, yep. I said, that would be Scott Cugno. It's a check for $29,000. She goes, okay, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I said, how did you get this number? She goes, well, we called the title company and they gave us this phone number.
Wow.
She could have called any other. And if she'd looked at all, she would have found his real number. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you. Hung up the phone. 5 minutes later, the bank manager comes out, counts out $29,000 to me, gives me the 29 grand. I stuff it in my pockets. I'm walking out and he said, Mr. Cugno. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, I'd like you to know I feel very apprehensive about this transaction. And I went, really? I go, what is it exactly? He goes, I can't put my finger on it. I go, it'll come to you. And I walk off. I'd say probably a week later, the Secret Service showed up and asked him why he cashed a check for $29,000. what else was he going to do? I mean, like, I wasn't leaving. I have real ID. Everything I have on me is real, and there's no checks that you can do to prove that it's not me. I can't leave. So, that was the type of thing where, if I was going to open a corporation, I went and got a corporate lawyer. If I was going to, like, if you have enough money, you can do things that seem legitimate enough to keep you kind of in the clear. And I kept
kind of
moving.
past those initial sniff tests.
Right. And listen, what if you start sweating, or you get nervous, or you start pacing, or you suddenly jump up and, I'm going to go wait outside. No, I'll wait here. Can y'all get me something to drink? Do you have something to drink?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a question about that. Like, how is your demeanor when all this is unfolding? Because I'd imagine, like you said, like a lot of people would cry. Like, I feel like I would just be, sweating, be like frazzled and worried. But you seem like you're very cool, calm, and collected during all this.
So, I mean, even if I was inside, and many times I was terrified, like many times inside, I'm just like, it's just, but you couldn't tell that. And the Secret Service and FBI, they said every single one of these people we talked to said, this guy was not nervous. You understand? He asked for the manager. He argued. He didn't pace. He didn't walk outside. He didn't leave. He sat there. He asked me to get him a Diet Sprite. It's like, this guy, he's not, there's like, what was I going to do? I couldn't. He was unshakable. So even though I was terrified, the truth is I was terrified. I'm sitting there like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But how much worse would it have been if I jumped up and ran? You think something's wrong, and the guy gets up and just runs out of the bank. Now
Yeah.
Right. And look, if the cops showed up, and so listen, one time, after the Atlanta, I went to Charlotte, but I ran a scam in South Carolina, in Columbia, South Carolina. So I bought a couple of houses. I bought 2 houses, and I bought 2 houses in the name of a homeless guy by the name of Gary Sullivan. I borrowed $1.3 million on those houses.
And where was this?
In is it Columbia or Columbus, South Carolina?
Okay. So this is after you left Georgia.
Yes.
Okay.
So I borrowed like $1.3 million. I've got like 6 mortgages on one of the houses, like $1 million. And I'm pulling out, I pulled out about $600,000, and 2 sheriff's deputies walk in behind me and handcuff me. So I'm in a bank, ask for whatever, nothing, like $4,000. Sitting there, I'm waiting. And when you open a new account, they have to like make a phone call to for the first 6 months. And I'm pulling out a lot of cash. The balancers, it's going up and down, but still they have to call. So I'm waiting. And as I'm waiting, all of a sudden 2 sheriff's deputies walk up behind me and grab me by the wrist and pull my hands behind my back, and they handcuff me. And they're like, and I was living, I had a driver's license in the name Gary Sullivan. No, an ID in the name Gary Sullivan, issued in South Carolina.
So at this point, you're Gary Sullivan.
I'm Gary Sullivan. I met him in Las Vegas. He's living under a bridge in South Carolina. I mean, I'm sorry, in Las Vegas. He's a homeless guy in Las Vegas. So they bring me into the manager's office. I'm sitting there. And they said, we're waiting for the investigator. I said, okay. The investigator shows up. He walks in. He says, hey, Mr. Sullivan, I'm investigator Richards, whatever his name was.
This is the FBI.
No, that's what I thought. It was the FBI. I remember thinking when they said the investigator, I thought, oh, the FBI is coming. I'm done. But they're calling me Gary Sullivan.
Okay.
I'm like, I know I'm in trouble. Like, they've got to know. Like, I'm not saying anything. I'm just sitting there with a pair of handcuffs on. He walks in and he says he's an investigator with the Richland County Sheriff's Department. And I was like, okay, no, police department. I think it was police department. I don't know, whatever. And I was like, okay. And he said, yeah, the Wachovia Bank. Do you remember Wachovia Bank?
Yeah.
Are they still around? Like, I don't ever see them anymore.
I can't recall seeing them around here anymore.
I'm pretty sure they probably went under. So anyway, Wachovia, the head of Wachovia's fraud department said that you've got 3 mortgages on your house. And I actually had 6 mortgages on that house. And I looked at him and I go, is that illegal? And he goes, you know what? I'm not sure. And I remember thinking, I'm walking out of here. I'm walking out of here. Like, this guy, he doesn't have a clue what's going on. So they get Wachovia on the phone, and the guy from the fraud department says, this guy's running a shotgunning scam. He closed on these 3 first mortgages so quickly we couldn't catch it. Now he's pulling out cash. They, of course, say, why are you pulling out cash? And I said, because I work for a construction company. Or I think it was a labor company at that. I said labor on demand. Was it? I said, I work for a labor company. We hire a bunch of laborers. We write them checks and we cash the checks. Otherwise, they pay 10% at a check cashing company. I know the checks are good. I said, it's just like a little.
You're playing the Good Samaritan card.
I'm just a decent guy, bro. It's about people helping people.
Right.
So I tell him that, and he's like, okay. And I go, is that illegal? He's no, that's not illegal. I said, okay. And so the guy, we start going back and forth. He says they're first mortgages. And I went, no, they're not. I have a first mortgage, a second mortgage, and a HELOC. He screams they're first mortgages. I said, now Wachovia has a first mortgage, but the other ones are a second mortgage and a HELOC. No, that's not true. And I said, listen, man, I read those documents. Not one of them said first mortgage on it. Because you understand that it's the placement of the mortgage that makes it a first mortgage.
Right.
So I'm like, I read all those things. So think about it. If they were all first mortgages, how would I know? That's between you and the title company. I'm just a guy that was told to go sign some papers. So I sat there and I was like, yeah, no. And I explained that to him. Guy screams and hollers. And he says, well, why did you take out so much money on one house? I said, I came to Wachovia. I told the woman I wanted to get about $500,000. She asked me if I had a house. I said, yes. She said, I can get you a first mortgage for about $190,000. I said, well, that's not, I need more. She said, well, I have a friend that works at another company. They specialize in second mortgages. I'll send you over there. I went over there. She got me a second mortgage. She said, I can get you I have a friend that works at another company. She can get you a HELOC. I said, okay. So I went over there. I said, so what makes more sense? A guy that works at a labor company convinced 3 major banks to lend him $500,000 on a house that was worth $230,000, or 3 loan officers came up with a scheme to lend that money. Me as a borrower, I haven't signed anything that says I can't borrow more than what that value of that house is. I said, now the bank may have done something wrong, but I didn't. And keep in mind that the head of Wachovia's fraud department is on the phone screaming, we haven't done anything wrong. These are first mortgages. He's lying. That's not true. Our loan officer wouldn't do anything like that. But it makes sense, right? So the investigator's like, and in the middle of Wachovia's rant, he says, look at he's running a scam. Look at his ID. It's a fake ID. It starts with 000. South Carolina ID start with 000, by the way, because it was a real ID. So immediately the investigator goes, he said, listen, I ran him through NCIC. This is Gary Sullivan. He said his ID was issued a couple months ago at the local DMV. Our ID start with 000. And so I looked at him and I go, oh, bro, come on. Now I'm not Gary Sullivan. I go, man, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? And he goes, I know, Gary. I know. So he says, I'm going to take him downtown. We're going to fill out a police report. I'll let you know what we come up with. And he hangs up the phone on Wachovia. They take the handcuffs off. They let me get in my car. I follow the guy back to I fill out a police report, and he lets me go. While I'm waiting for his lieutenant to sign off on the police report to let me go, he has me stand in the hallway, and there's a bunch of wanted posters in the hallway. My Secret Service's most wanted poster is in the hallway.
Wow.
He walks me right out. And I always get people that are like, why didn't you just run? Why didn't you take off when you saw it? If you've ever been in a police station, it's like it's like Fort Knox just to get in.
There's no running at that point.
No.
Yeah.
Even if I had gotten to the elevator, you had to punch a code in to get down. Then you had to get through a buzz out and buzz in. Like I was not this. No, I was like, no, I just play it out. I was terrified.
I was gonna say, are you like freaking out at this point? And all these stories that you're coming up with, are you just coming up with these on the fly, or are you like pre-rehearsed? Like, okay, if something goes wrong, like this is the story I'm going with.
So the Wachovia story I came up with just immediately, because think about it, I didn't know what he knew.
Right.
It wasn't until he said, Wachovia says you have 3 first mortgages. And I immediately thought, you better come up with something.
Right.
Because I had 6. So I remember thinking, okay, they only caught 3. What's a good story? What makes this work? And, so this is what works. Those aren't first mortgages. And even if they are first mortgages, how would I know what's going on? I'm not a loan officer. I work at a labor company. Listen, I had a business card. I had W-2s, pay stubs. You could check it out and imagine. And he knew I had 2 houses in the area. So he knew everything. By the time he got to me, he'd pulled me. He'd done his homework. It all passed. So he let me go. From there, I went to Houston because we had relocated by that point. Becky had moved all of our stuff to Houston. I left like $600,000 in the bank, by the way. I got out maybe $700,000. That was it. So I went to Charlotte, and then I went to Houston. I packed up my stuff. I remember I packed up my stuff because she had her own place by that point. We'd like broken up. I was like, look, I can't deal with you. You're insane. So I got our own apartment, but we were still, partners. Like, so I go to Houston. We get into an argument when we go to Houston. I come back. I have to come back to Charlotte because my car was in Charlotte. But keep in mind, in South Carolina, they saw my car. They got my tag number in another name. And when he asked me about it, he said, I noticed that you're driving a guy named Michael Eckert's car. And I said, oh, yeah, that's my boss. And he said, oh, okay. Like, that's all. That was a whole conversation. Like, I'm not offering anything else. And so by the time I go to Houston and I'm on my way back, at that point, I actually called the FBI agent that was in Florida. I called some friends and one of my friends, which was an ex-mortgage broker of mine, she said she talked to the FBI and she said, you got to call this woman, see if you can turn yourself in. I was in a bad spot. I just got into an argument with my girlfriend. I got no IDs. All my other alternative identification and IDs I left in Houston. So I'm driving a U-Haul van. I've got a driver's license in the name that I now know they're probably looking for. So I called the FBI and basically said, look, what if I turn myself in? How much time do I have to do? So I talked to this woman at the FBI. She's saying like 7 years if I cooperate. And that was just for Tampa. So I'm thinking 15. I don't want to do 15 years. I didn't want to cooperate against anybody either. I'd seen the movie The Godfather. I knew that you're not supposed to cooperate. which if I could do it over again, I'd have left right and I've driven right back to Tampa. Been like, I'm here. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah. What do you want to know?
Yeah, but I didn't. I was like, oh, I'm not doing that. An idiot. So I end up going back to Charlotte. I get in my car. I get my car, and I go into a Starbucks, right, which was like catty corner from my apartment complex, and it was like the 4th or the 5th. I hadn't paid my rent yet because I'd driven all the way to, I'd been gone for like 4 or 5 days, and I knew I was abandoning the place, so I'm not going to pay. My rent was like whatever, it was like $2,000 for like a 1-bedroom. It was a nice place. So I go into the Starbucks and I see 2 of the employees that work at the apartment complex, and they start having this heated kind of little panicked exchange. And there's a man and a woman. The woman leaves. She walks out the back. The guy just stands there, and he gets his order from the barista. I make my order. I get my order. He just stands there. He doesn't leave. He's got like one of those foam trays with a bunch of cups in it, and just staring at me. And I'm like, what is going on? And all I could think about was, this is because I haven't paid my rent. Like they probably just put an eviction notice on my door or a 3-day notice or something, like, like that's all I'm thinking. And so I leave, I get my coffee and I walk out and I get in my I like an Infinity sports car thing. No, Infinity? Yeah, it was an Infinity. Like the sports car, the G, whatever. So I get in it. I'm sitting there, and the guy comes out and he stands on the sidewalk. He's just staring at me. And all of a sudden, I start the car. I'm about to pull out, and all of a sudden he starts screaming, "He's right here! He's right here!" And I look in the rear view mirror, and there's two guys running towards the back of my car. And I just punched it and took off. Boom, gone.
This is in the Starbucks parking lot.
No, it was actually downtown. So there's no parking lot. It's street parking. So it's just
okay, gotcha. Okay.
So I just take off. Which sounds more dramatic, right? Like it sounds like I didn't do a whole TJ Hooker thing where I slid across the front and jumped. I was basically already pulling out. So it sounds dramatic, but I did punch it. But it's not like I fishtailed out of there or anything. It had that posi traction thing. So it just went boom. And so I take off down the road. I drive down the road. I stop at a homeless shelter a mile away, survey 3 more guys or 2 more guys. Anyway, one of the guys was named Joseph Carter. Well, one was Michael. One was also what's his name? What was his name? Anyway, doesn't matter. So Joseph Carter, I get his information. I go to Nashville, Tennessee. I'm driving through Nashville. There's an area in Nashville called Green Hills. And I drive through Green Hills, really nice area. And I see some guy putting a sign in the front yard. It says like, for rent. So I pull in, get out. Now, by this point, I drove there, stayed the night in a motel, got a cell phone in the name of, even though I don't have an ID, I don't have anything yet. I just have his information. I get a cell phone in the name of Joseph Carter. I get business cards ordered. I go, you know what HQ is?
Oh, what?
HQ.
It's
like a virtual office. They'll have like one of the top floors in a building in downtown.
Like an executive suite or something.
Thank you. Exactly.
Okay.
So they'll answer the phone for you. You can call up and get an account with them. They'll answer the phone, transfer phone calls, take messages, email you, the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Take packages. So I get one of those, and they're answering the phone. Manufactured funding group. So I say that I'm like a loan manager or something, account executive for manufactured funding group. So I get that business, and I get my cell phone. I put it on the card. I ordered like 100 cards from Kinko's. Remember Kinko's?
Yeah.
That's now the UPS store also. So I order those cards, drive through looking for a place to stay because I'm in like a motel. So I drive through Green Hills. I see this guy putting a sign in the front yard. I pull over and I said, "Hey, you renting this place?" And he goes, "Yeah." It was like a townhouse. It's like 2 townhouses. So I always say it's a duplex, but it's like 2 townhouses next to his house, which was massive. So I walk in the place, look it up and down, walk through it, come back, say, "Man, it looks great." And he was probably in his 60s. And the guy looked at me and I said, "Do you need to pull my credit? Do you need to?" And he looked at me and he looked at my car and he goes, "You look like a nice young man." Yeah. He said, "I'll just take the first month's rent and a deposit." And I remember thinking, I'm going to like it here. Like, they're very trusting. So I give him my business card. I give him the cash. I'm like, "Oh, I don't even have a bank account yet. I just moved to town. I had a credit union." So, I know all this. Like, I know what to say that makes sense. "I do have cash. I think I got that on me." Got a lot of cash. So I count out the cash. Boom, there it is. He gives me the keys. Probably 2 days later, I have my furniture is delivered. I have furniture delivered because I left all my other furniture. I have furniture delivered. I have the electric and water turned on. Out of the hotel. I immediately turn around and I drive my car all the way back to Charlotte, North Carolina. I leave it in long-term parking. I fly back to Nashville. By that point, all of Joseph Carter's documents are showing up. I go into the local DMV. I get a driver's license. I remember I had to take the driving test as him. I almost failed it. I missed like 4 questions or something. I was like 1 away from failing it, which was funny because I've taken a lot of them. But they asked a lot of questions about alcohol, and every state's different. Anyway, I remember the woman at the DMV. When I got, I said, I almost failed that. She's like, I know, you were really close.
Yeah.
And I, of course, what am I going to say? I'm like, I take these all the time. So I get a driver's license. I immediately go. The guy, I have no credit. The guy's got no credit. I immediately go to CarMax with a couple of pay stubs, my business card, a couple of pay stubs, an ID that a driver's license was just issued, and I get a car loan. I put down 20%, get myself an SUV. We're talking about literally within, I'd say, a week, I was 100% set up. Like, listen, you have no idea how difficult that is. Like, everything came together. I then probably I waited 2 or 3 months because there was a bunch of articles. By this point, like, I've been in Fortune magazine, Bloomberg Business Week is doing articles. There's probably 20, maybe 30 articles in the St. Petersburg Times, Tampa Tribune's running stuff's in Atlanta. I mean, Chicago Tribune's doing a whole series of articles called The Fugitive. And I was on my own at that point. And so I went into a rundown area of Nashville called J.C. Napier, right next to the projects in Nashville. And I started buying houses for like 50, 60 grand, 30 grand, and recording the values higher. And I
started right back up again.
I borrowed $3.5 million.
Oh my gosh.
Over the next year. And I find out that Dateline, Dateline NBC News was about to do a 1-hour special on me. And so I was going to go to Australia. Like, like if you're in the newspaper, like, no big deal. Like, that's Atlanta. I'm way out here. And by this point too, I've had multiple plastic surgeries. I've had a nose job. I had 2 hair transplants. They pull the hair from the back of your head and they stick them in. Like, this isn't real. It's my hair. It grows, but it's supposed to be back here. Anyway, I got my teeth done. They're not, they're pretty good. So I got my teeth done. I did a liposuction, like, under the neck. It's called like a mini facelift. So I'm looking a little different. I figure I'm okay, but I'm not going to be okay when Dateline comes out. Like, I don't look that much different. So I decided I'm going to go to Australia. Australia had a program at that point. I don't know what it is now, but if you showed up there with like $100,000 in a business plan, they would let you be a permanent resident alien. You couldn't work, but you could come there and open a business and hire Aussies. And the only reason I picked that was because they didn't run your fingerprints. You need your passport. So I can buy property, and I'm going to show up with millions. So me and the girl, I started dating some new girl. We're pulling money out of the bank, but we had a friend, right? Like a friend of hers that would come over every once in a while, and whatever. So she ends up telling her who I am. That girl goes to the Secret Service and she turns me in. 3 days later, they watch my house for 3 days, and 3 days later, I get arrested by the Secret Service.
Wow.
I know. It's anticlimactic.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear about how all that went down. But when you're taking out all these loans on these properties, how are you getting the cash? How are you turning all these loans into cash?
Well, here's the thing. And people ask that, like, a lot of times if I got a loan for $250,000 and it sits in the bank, people are like, well, how'd you get the money out? Like, why did I need to get the money out? This person isn't wanted.
You just spend it like a normal person.
Right. Now, keep in mind, if let's say I pulled out money in the name of Walter Holcomb, and Walter Holcomb probably had $1 million and $1.5 million in mortgages. Now, I pull out, I use my debit card. I keep the money in the bank. Maybe I pull out cash every once in a while, a couple thousand a year, a couple thousand, but I'm not in a hurry, because even if all of those mortgages were to go into foreclosure, nobody's going to come looking for Walter Holcomb. I mean, his credit's ruined, but at no point are they going to go seize the money in the bank. This is Bank of America lent you $150,000 or $250,000. You made 3 payments. You stop paying. Bank of America doesn't call up. They don't call up First Tennessee Bank and say, "What's in his account? Send it to us." That doesn't happen.
Right.
I keep the money. You can put it on my credit. You take the house. That's the best you've got. They don't know that a fraud has been committed. You can call his employer. You can check his ID. It's real. His social security is real. All of the credit cards are real. You can take the house back. It's real. The appraisal is real. All the comparables are real. There's no way for you to figure out that this is fraud.
And by the time they do, you're long gone.
Well, the only time they would ever figure out it was fraud, the only scam they ever figure out it's fraud is if I take out multiple mortgages.
Right.
But if I drive the price up in the area and pull out the equity, they have no clue that a fraud's been committed. I make 4, 5, 6 payments. I stop paying. It goes into foreclosure. They take the house back. They put it on the market for $200,000, hoping to get the $200,000 back. They don't. 3 months later, they go to the real estate agent. The real estate agent says, "I don't know. The comparables, there's comparables all over the place. I mean, it's just not selling. Some kids broke in the other day, knocked out the windows. Someone stole the copper pipes. They're trashing the house. It's a horrible neighborhood." Then they say, "Okay, well, put it on the market for 150." They put it on 150. 3 months later, they come back. It's still not selling. Someone's living in the house now. Put it on the market for 100,000. 3 months later, they come back. Put it on the market for 50,000.
Yeah, they're just trying to fire sale it at that point.
It sells for 50,000, which is what I probably bought it for a year ago anyway. What did they lose? They lost $150,000. Does that happen? Happens all the time. No fraud is not involved. So the fact that I am not Walter Holcomb, or the fact that I'm not Joseph Carter or any of these guys that I borrowed money in, I mean, that's really, that's not an issue. Listen, in Florida, I didn't do this in Nashville because I wasn't there for any foreclosures. But in Florida, when these guys, they'd get 5, 6 houses and mortgages in their names. So at some point, your credit, your scores just drop to nothing. I've got so many mortgages so quickly. Their 700 credit scores dropped to like 580, 570, and I'm making the payments, but there's just nothing you can do, So typically by that point, I had gotten unsecured credit cards for 20 or 30,000. For instance, if Bank of America, and really I say Bank of America, but a lot of these loans were Countrywide. Remember Countrywide?
Yeah.
So Countrywide had a thing where this happened over and over again. Like, for instance, James Red. James Red would have a house worth $220,000. He would get a mortgage on the house for $190,000. As soon as I close, I would automatically get a pre-approved credit card in the mail for $30,000, which was the amount of the equity. Now, typically you wouldn't notice that, right? But if you're James Red and you're David Silver and you're William Blue and you're Brandon Green, and it happens every time you get a Countrywide loan, you start to put it together. You're like, they're giving me the equity in a credit card. That's like somebody came up with an underwriting guideline for their credit card saying, hey, if the mortgage company is willing to lend him this, let's give him a credit card worth the value of his equity. And that's what they would do. So I'm borrowing $190,000, getting a credit card for $30,000. So these guys are getting $1 million, $1.2, $1.3 million. And then I would turn around and I would go get personal loans in their name. So I'd go into the bank and I'd say, hey, I need a personal loan for $15,000. And they'd pull my credit and they'd go, okay. And then I just drive across the street and I go and apply at another bank. I need a personal loan, $15,000. They go, okay. And I drive, and you could only get about 3 or 4 before they'd say, were you just at Bank of America? I'd be like, yeah, I'm just shopping rates. Yeah, we don't feel comfortable. So, but I could typically get 3, sometimes 4. So I just got another $60,000 and I'd make the payments. But I only make the payments for a few months. and then he has a tragic accident.
Mm.
So I stopped paying. And when the credit card companies and the banks start sending collection notices, I would write a letter from let's say from Brandon Green. Brandon Green's his sister, because he doesn't exist, his sister would write a letter that said, look, my brother was in a tragic accident and he's in a coma. And the doctors say, even if he comes out of the coma, he'll never work again. So take the house. We're not going to fight the foreclosure, which, they know that anyway. But it gives them a reason. They make that notation. And now every time they go to look at the file, they go, oh yeah, this guy was in a car accident. And then I would print out a copy of like a 12-car pileup on I-4. And someone was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital, and I'd put my guy's name in it. Brandon Green was life flighted.
Wow.
And I'd mail it. And they just stopped coming around. They stopped calling. The letters stopped. They just, okay, foreclose. They just need a reason. And that's reasonable. Keep in mind, if they called his employer, the guy answers. The agency answers. They go, yeah, what's up? Oh, I'm sorry, he doesn't work here anymore. That's all they know. You call his cell phone, it's disconnected. His sister told you what happened. I had one of my buddies that I was doing this with that was kind of like, I remember he was like, you ought to say he's dead. And I was like, my fear is, what if they have some kind of policy? What if they check with the local, what if they check and try and get his death certificate? Like, I mean, I was like, what are they going to do? They don't know where he's put in. Like, what are they do? They're going to call all the hospitals and see if they can get him. Even if they get him, they're not getting any money.
Mm.
And they were like, I was like, the letter's good enough. Like, I'm sorry, the article's good enough. So anyway, yeah, I got, so a lot of times I just left the money in the bank because there was no hurry. It wasn't until I started doing the scams when I started getting the money out of the banks. That's when I needed to get the cash out of the banks. And at that point, what I was doing was I had so many IDs. I would just go into, I'd go into Bank of Georgia and get a bank account. I go into Wachovia and get a bank account. I go into Bank of America and get a bank account. I go into, usually by the third bank, they have a problem. They're like, yeah, listen, I don't know why I just turned it down. Or they'd say, have you been to several other banks today? Like, they pull you through check systems.
Mm-hmm.
And they see the inquiries and they go, yeah, there's an issue. We're not going to open a bank account for you, which is fine. I already have 3. But I would also open corporations. Corporation gets to open up 3 accounts also. And I've got multiple IDs. So if I've got 9 bank accounts and you're getting out $15,000 a week out of 9 bank accounts, it doesn't take that long to get $500,000. Mm-hmm. Within a month, you've got your $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's just off of one guy and a couple corporations. I have multiple. Think about it. If I have a dozen, what if I have 20? And I've got at that point, I had a partner with me, a female partner that she's same thing. She's getting fake IDs in her name. She's got fake passports. She's got bank accounts. We're putting money in her name. She's pulling the money out. So it's not hard to pull that money out. But like I said, most of the time, there wasn't a rush. We weren't in a rush. In a way, you want to get it out as quick as possible because you're having to make all these payments. You're making in Tampa, the payments were $45,000 a month. I had a buddy of mine that was involved with me in this whole thing, told me the other day, I saw him at the gym and we were talking. He goes, you remember how much the payments were? I was like, what, per month? And he was like, yeah. I said, I don't remember. He has $45,000 a month.
And that's all the mortgages and the personal loans and the credit cards and all that.
Right. And I was like, these are the ones that were going into foreclosure. And he's like, yeah, I started trying to pay them. So I had to get his whole sheet and list them. And I was like, they were in foreclosure. He's like, I was trying to catch them up. I didn't know what to do. Like, what are you doing?
Wow.
So yeah, it was yeah, that's insanity. What's funny is Forbes. So in 2004, Forbes came out with an article that said in 2003, the Ybor City zip code, the 33605 zip code, was one of the top 20 fastest growing zip codes in the nation.
I wonder why.
And the median price in the course of during that year had gone from like 150,000 up to 250, 260.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
because all the value is getting pushed up.
Yeah.
That's insane. So then walk us through that getting caught moment. Like,
Yeah. That's not a bad day. That was, it's so weird because I, you know, there's a couple things that actually I talked to someone. I did an interview the other day, right, on my YouTube channel. I was interviewing this girl who actually broke her boyfriend out of prison. Like bolt cutters, cut through two fence lines. Like I mean, threw in Allen wrenches to him so he could take the doors off the hinge. I mean, just straight hilarious, like insane. And it reminded me that there's two things she reminded me of a story. I'll tell you the story. But so there's two things. One is I remember before I went to prison, I had watched a movie from like the 1970s, right? And it was about, and I wish to God I could remember the name of the movie. So there was a guy getting out of prison. The opening credits start with a guy getting out of prison. Guard comes up to his cell and says, "Hey, Johnson, pack your stuff up." And he goes, "What for? What?" He goes, "Early release, prison overcrowding." It was in New York back in the 70s. They did that kind of stuff. So he's like, okay, packs up his stuff. He goes, he gets on the bus, he gets to the bus station, and he goes to use the payphone. Well, there's a long line at the payphone. He's trying to call his wife, right? Like he got let out 6 months early. But there's a long line, and there's a taxi beeping its horn, and so he's like, forget it. Goes and he gets into the taxi, and he drives through New York City. The credits are playing. He drives across the bridge. He goes into Manhattan. He goes in, and he goes up the elevator, walks to the front door, puts his key in the front door, goes to open it, and you can hear his wife say, "Honey, do you want some wine?" And some guy is sitting at the table and says, "Yeah, baby, I'll take some wine." And he stops. So the prisoner stops, and you can see the rage in his face. And he ends up, but he thinks about it for a second. You can see that, and he closes the door, shuts it, locks the door, goes downstairs, walks across the street, calls her from the payphone. She answers the phone. She's like, "Oh my gosh, honey, how are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm doing good." He said, "I was released early. I'm in the city, but I didn't want to stop by just in case you needed to clean up before I got there." And she says, I do need to clean up. I do need to clean up. And he goes, "Okay, how long do you need?" And she's like, "Give me 20 minutes. He's like, "Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. 5 minutes later, his wife comes out the front door with the guy behind her. She's dragging his bags, throws it into a taxi, starts screaming at him. "You knew this was what was going on. You knew he was coming home. It's over," and leaves. Taxi drives off. Prisoner waits a couple minutes, walks across the street, goes up the elevator, walks to the front door. She opens the front door. They hug. He goes. She said, I have spaghetti waiting." He sits down at the table, and she says, "Do you want some wine?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll take some wine." She gives him some wine. And I remember thinking, if you ever go to prison, that's the best you could hope for. Your wife's not waiting for you. So don't even get that in your mind. So when I got arrested, I had this girlfriend that I was so in love with, right? Like, just thought she's going to wait for me, in my mind, like, but I remember that kind of, I remember thinking, she's not going to wait. So I pull up to my house, and all of a sudden, like one of those Suburban, like this black car pulls up, and then the Suburban pulls up, and another car, they pull up and they jump out, and everybody's got these vests on, and they're screaming, "Get on the ground, get on the ground." And I'm like, "Whoo," and so I jump, I get on the ground. I actually didn't initially, I didn't get on there. I just stood there until I just, as the guy approached me, I realized it said Secret Service on the front of it. And he walked up to me with the gun, and he looked at me and he goes, "Get on the ground." And I go, oh, oh. And I got on the ground because they were yelling so much, and I just didn't know what was happening, and I couldn't make heads or tail of what they were saying. So I got on the ground. They put handcuffs on me. They sit me up. They kind of look at me, and I remember the guy had my wanted poster, and he looked at me, and there were a couple of them gathered around. They were looking at the poster and me, looking at the poster, and me, and he goes, "It's not him." He goes, "No, it's him. It's him." He goes, "It is him. It's him." He goes, "No, this is him." And he looks at me and he goes, "It is you, right, Mr. Cox?" He said, "You are Matthew Cox, right?" And I went, "Yeah, I'm Matt Cox." Like I knew I was done. Now, the girl Becky had been caught about 6 months earlier, maybe a year. No, about 6 months. I think about 6 months earlier. She'd been caught, and they said when they got her, she yelled for an hour the whole way back to the U.S. Marshals, because U.S. Marshals got her all the way back to their office, screaming, "You guys messed up. You're going to lose your job. Somebody's going to get fired. You fucked up. I don't know who this person is. My name is Rebecca Hickey." Because she had an ID in the name Rebecca Hickey, driver's license in the state of Texas. "My name is Rebecca Hickey. You messed up. This is bullshit." All the way, denied it all the way till they put her hand on the scanner, and she goes, "Okay, fine. What do you guys want to do?" I was not that gangster. I buckled immediately. This wasn't some bank manager. This wasn't some local cop. I wasn't going to talk my way out of it. I was done. So yeah, they grabbed me. They put me in the Suburban. They drive me back to Secret Service headquarters in downtown Nashville. Like they couldn't take me in the front door. They had to drive around the back, and because there was so much press, they called that somebody must have called like the local media or something, because they were all out there with cameras and stuff. And they drove around the back of the building. They have like a thing they drive down, and so yeah, I brought there and handcuffed to a table and told him I wanted to talk to a lawyer. And I said, I have no problem talking to you, but I'm gonna have to get a lawyer. Like I need to know what's going on. So they fly me back to Atlanta, and then probably 6 months later, I was interviewed by the Secret Service, and maybe a couple weeks or a month after that, the FBI interviewed me. Yeah, I was sentenced to 26 years.
That's what I was going to ask. What were you facing at the time? Like when they added it all up?
So look, okay. So there's two numbers. One, if you add them up and you kind of, they call it you stack them. Like this charge covers 10 years. This one's 5 years. This one, so it was like 54 years total. But there were multiple charges. So this one's, there's 4 counts of this charge, which holds 5 years. So if you did that, it comes to like 150 something years. But they say that's just not true. Like they're not going to give me 150 years. But I was looking at probably 54. And if you just plead guilty, then the most they could have given me was 32 years.
Wow. Which it's at that point, you're how old?
30. By the time I was sentenced, I was 38, 37 when I got arrested. Because it takes about a year. You sit in the U.S. Marshals holdover, and your lawyer comes every 2-3 weeks and tells you something horrible. Yeah. So I got 26 years. They had told me,
and at that point, had you pled guilty and just told them everything?
I told them everything, but like everybody else had already told them everything.
Right.
Like I'm not giving them anything new.
Okay.
They want
they had put all the pieces together by that point.
Right. They want new information. Like I don't have new information. When you've talked to 15 of your co-conspirators, I don't have a lot of new information. Yeah, it's so you plead guilt. I pled guilty, and hoped that something I had told them would lead to something, some kind of an arrest or something. But but it didn't. Like I didn't. Well, for one thing, by the time I'm arrested, it's late 2007. So in 2008, I get to Coleman. So they're now investigating. Well, how much investigating do you do in 2008 on bank fraud that only amounts to around 55 million when you've got banks that have stole billions?
Right.
So I suddenly, when I was super high on their priority list, I'm now not high on their priority list. So it takes years before the FBI starts to show up again and starts to say, "Hey, we're looking at this, we're looking at that." But by that point, they just said, "Look, man, the entire economy is melting down. There's just no reason for us to go after these people." It's now 5, 6 years old, some of these cases. And they were like, they're viable because they're bank. There's some of these have 10-year. Some of them are banks. There's 10-year statute of limitations. And they're just like, yeah, we're not going after it. Like, that's it. I'm like, okay, well, wait a second. I was told you were going to reduce my sentence if I cooperate. Yeah, I know, but people have to be, arrested. Or I'm like, whoa, that's not what I was told. I was told, one, if I was interviewed by Dateline, they would reduce my sentence. I was interviewed by Dateline. They didn't reduce my sentence. Then a TV show called American Greed asked to interview me. They told me, the government said, look, if you're interviewed by them, we'll reduce your sentence. A lot of people will tell you, oh, you should have got it in writing. Okay, right. So you say, I want it in writing. They go fuck yourself. We're not giving it to you in writing. Take my word for it. We'll make that determination after you do what we told you to do. Most people, you always get these gangsters like, well, I tell them go screw themselves. I'll just go do my 26 years. No, you won't. Your wife is crying. She's divorcing you. Your kids don't know your name. They're already calling somebody else daddy. You've lost all your stuff. Your parents are sick. You want to get out of prison. Those people that you don't want to cooperate against, all those people, all your buddies that you're like, I'm not going to tell on my, but your buddies don't call you. They don't come see you. They don't put money on their books. Some of them are trying to sleep with your wife. Like, come on, man. Like, I get it. It sounds good when you're sitting in your living room in the air conditioning, eating pizza and watching a series on Netflix. But when you haven't, when you're eating crap and your kids are crying, no. You're ready to cut people's heads off. You're ready to cut people's throats. It's over. I'll do anything to get out of here. But didn't work out that way. So what I did was, I did the interviews and then they didn't do anything. And then they came to me and they said, look, we want you to write an ethics and fraud course because loan officers have to take like 9 hours of continuing education every year. And 3 hours of it is on ethics and fraud. We want you to write a course to be taught by the industry that's available to the industry. And, so, okay, fine. So I write this course. It's 9,500. I list all the scams that I committed. I break them down. I give examples. I do the whole thing. And they use it. Jim Montrum's National Mortgage Brokers business uses it. I then wrote a red flags rule course for the federal government called the Federal Red Flags Rule course. And after they got all of that, my lawyer went to him and said, look, you got to reduce his sentence. And they said, yeah, it's just not enough. So I ended up not even hiring. I'm going to say hiring. I ended up going to a lawyer in federal prison who was named Frank Amadeo. Frank Amadeo is a disbarred attorney who suffers from bipolar condition with features of schizophrenia. And he's out there. And he was filing people's, filing motions for people like 2255s, they're what they're called. And I called several lawyers on the street and all of them said, there's nothing you can do. You cannot compel, you cannot force the government to reduce your sentence, and the court cannot compel them to reduce your sentence. They have to make it on their own. They have to make that decision on their own, and they've made it, and they're saying they're not going to do it. So I go to Frank and I explain it to Frank, and Frank files a 2255 motion for me. Says Mr. Cox cooperated with you, did all these things that you told him to do, and you misled him, and his lawyer obviously didn't know the law. So Mr. Cox basically, we want to take his plea back. And the government eventually came back and said, okay, we'll reduce his sentence, but we don't know what to reduce it to. So they bring me back to court in front of the judge. We explain everything I've done to the judge, and the judge says, I'm going to knock 7 years off your sentence. And I got 26 years, right? So 19 years, better than 26.
It's a start.
The start. It's funny because when I went back and I saw Frank, I go back to the prison, I see Frank, and I said, hey, Frank. And he said, I heard you got 7 years off. I said, I did, and I really appreciate it. And I said, I was just hoping for more. And he said, I was hoping you were going to get more too. And he said, we're going to have to eat this elephant one spoonful at a time. He goes, something else will come up. And I went, okay, I don't know what's going to come up. Like, what's going to come up? I'm in prison. There's nothing I can do. So a couple months later, I'm walking around the prison rec yard with this guy who's his name is Ron Wilson. He's from South Carolina. He ran the largest Ponzi scheme in South Carolina history at that time. I think $57 million was lost, but I think he brought in like 102 million or something like that. But he lost like 57 million. And he specialized in focusing on pension funds and churches. So there's some issues with old Ron. Ron was probably 61, 62 years. I forget how old he was, but he had gotten 19 years, right? And he was cooperating against some of his co-defendants. And I remember walking around and he knew I had cooperated. And keep in mind, cooperating in prison, like you're a snitch. So, but I was also at a low by that point, and nobody's bothering me. Nobody's giving me a hard time or anything, because most people are there for cooperating for some reason. Most people cooperate, especially in white collar crimes, right? Like it's high. It's like 87% of white collar criminals cooperate. So, no big deal. I'm walking around with Wilson, and Wilson keeps saying that he keeps saying that nobody's going to that they're not going to reduce the sentence. They're going to screw him over. And I was like, well, you keep saying that. Why do you say that? And he said, I say that because they think I've hidden Ponzi scheme money. They think I still have money out there. And I'm like, well, you don't. So they'd have to prove that to withhold your cooperation. And so this went on. He mentioned it a couple times over the course of a month. And then one day I go, why do you keep saying that, bro? Like, they can't do that. And even if they do, we'll get Frank to file a 2255. And he looks at me and he goes, can I trust you? And I went, probably not. and he chuckled. He just kind of chuckled. And he said, I did put some money away. And I went, really? And he said, yeah. He said, my wife, which is like his wife was divorcing him because she had found out that he was having an affair. He goes, she's divorcing me. My fear is that I gave her some money, not much. He said like 150,000. He said, I'm afraid she's going to go to the FBI, or I'm sorry, the Secret Service, and turn it in. And then he said, my brother's got a little bit of money, maybe 30 grand. And I was like, okay. And he said, so I'm afraid they're going to turn that money in. I said, well, I doubt that, because they've already they were already interviewed by the Secret Service and said they didn't have any money. Like, that's obstruction of justice. So he's like, you don't understand. I was like, okay. Maybe a month later, I'm talking to my lawyer on the phone. I asked her for my transcripts because I was writing a book. I wrote a memoir, and I wanted to include some of the things that were said at my sentencing. I can't remember exactly. If you can, she's going to order them. It doesn't cost much. So I was like, okay, hey, can you order those? And she said, yeah, I'll order them. And I said, okay. She says, how's it going in there? I said, that's fine. She goes, anything going on? I went, like, what do you mean? She goes, anything you want to talk about? And I thought, like, this woman didn't want to talk to me when she was representing me. So I was like, no, not really, nothing. And then I went, you know what? Wait a second. Listen to this. And I told her what Wilson had said. And she's, let me look into it. I said, okay. Now I'm thinking, it doesn't matter. It's barely any money. They didn't want to give me anything last time when they promised me they'd give me something. So a week later, a guard comes up to me and goes, you got to go to the SIS office. And I was like, okay. So I go there. And at this point, I was writing guys' true crime stories. I've written a bunch of true crime stories. And so every once in a while, I would get called into SIS. It's kind of like their internal FBI. And they would say, hey, you got this in the mail. on this inmate. What are you doing? But by this point, they knew what I was doing. So they just call me and say, Cox, are you writing a story on this guy? And I go, yeah, I'm writing a story. And they go, okay, well, here, this came for you. And here, like they caught it in the mail room. They don't want to give it to you, but here, they'd give it to me. So I go in there and I'm waiting for him to give me my mail. And this correctional officer says, sit down. And I sit down at his desk and he picks up the phone and he calls somebody. And he goes, here, you got to talk to this guy. And I go, hello? I'm like, hello? And the guy says, hey, this is Agent Griffin from the Secret Service. I understand you know where Ron Wilson hid money. And I'm like, holy shit. And I'm like, I mean, I do, but it's not a lot of money. And I'm not telling you where it is unless I get something in writing. He says, I'll work on that. A week or two later, I get an email from him that says, from the U.S. attorney, that says, if Mr. Cox gives you information that leads to an arrest or the substantial amount of money returned, we'll reduce his sentence. We'll consider reducing his sentence.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best you're going to get. So I tell them what I know. They call Wilson's wife. They call the brother. They come in. Wilson's wife, first, she denies, I don't have nothing, and she leaves. The next morning, she comes in. She gives him $350,000 in cash, gold, and silver bullion. Way more than what he told me.
Wow.
And his brother comes in right after her and gives him $150,000 in cash. I mean, it's basically $500,000 in goods. And they're like, okay. So they get indicted for obstruction of justice. They get one gets 60 community hours or something. One of them gets 6 months probation. It's not even a felony. So they get charged. They don't go to jail, obviously. They get charged. That's what happens. They get Wilson gets reindicted, and he gets 6 months added onto his sentence, which is nothing, right? He's already got 19 and a half years. He now has they rounded it off to 20. Big deal. And then so my lawyer, we go to 3, 4, 5, 6 months go by. My lawyer goes to we go to the U.S. attorney, and they're like, I don't know what he's talking about. Well, you said you'd reduce my sentence. And they're like, we'll look into it. So then I have Frank files another motion, 2255, saying this is what happened. The government comes back and says, Your Honor, we don't know anything about this. We send in the letter saying where they said they did know about it and they were going to give me something. And the judge comes back and basically what happens is that we go back and forth, and immediately they give me another lawyer. The lawyer flies down and we negotiate another sentence reduction. And so I get another 5 years knocked off my sentence. By this point, I'm now basically a year away from getting out of prison.
Wow.
A year later, boom, I'm in a halfway house.
Mm.
So that was 4 years ago. I got the halfway house, 4 years ago. I've been on federal probation for 4 years. I have 1 more year of probation. I started a YouTube channel 2 years ago. It is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, what an amazing story. That's
bro, I'm supposed to be in prison right now.
Yeah.
My out date was 2030.
Wow.
Right?
That's really unbelievable.
Can you imagine how good I feel? I feel great. And listen to this. Wilson got out early. He got the COVID Relief Act thing. They let him out.
So it worked out for him in the end as well.
Listen, I actually would love to talk to the guy. I'd love to call him up and get an interview. He's got a great story.
Mm.
You should call him. His name's Ron Wilson.
Yeah. Let's
oh no, you don't do true crime. You don't do true crime. You do your real estate.
Yeah. Real estate, entrepreneurship.
I don't know. This is barely real estate. You really went out on a limb on this one. This was a stretch.
Yeah, you know what though? The story was too fascinating not to have you on. I mean, it just from top to bottom, wow.
Is that listen, I do keynote speaking.
Yeah.
People pay me to go and tell this story. I tell it in about 45 minutes, and then I do 15 minutes of Q&A, and they fly me out and pay me. I'm doing YouTube. YouTube cuts me a check. Like I didn't think about all the things that I'm doing right now. I sell true crime books. Like I wrote a bunch of stories from guys in prison. I wrote a bunch of true crime books. I've optioned the life rights to several guys. So it's like, how insane is it? Like I go in as this complete con man, scumbag fail. Not that I'm not still a scumbag. But you know, I go in as this kind of, you know, this whole fraudster thing, but I come out and the world that when I went in didn't even exist. When I went into prison, there was no YouTube. It had been out for like a year. I think they started like a year or two before. I don't think I was even ever on YouTube.
That's the stuff you don't even think about.
Yeah. Bro, the first few years, it was just like people uploading like their backyard barbecue and shit, you know, or their kid, you know, falling down, you know, trying to ride a skateboard. Like it was silly for the first few years. So I don't think ever recall being on it. It wasn't what it is now. There were no such thing as a podcast. The word podcast wasn't even invented till 5 years after. Listen, iPhones weren't invented. I'd been locked up 3 years before they came out with the first iPhone.
Wow.
So it's like I came out, I stepped into this complete bizarro world where people are walking around staring at their cell phones. They have Facebook friends. I'd never been on Facebook. So I came out and people are like, guys in prison are like, bro, you got to do a podcast. I'm like, what? Podcast? You got to do a true crime podcast. I'm like, what's that? They're like, you know, you write stories, but you just tell stories. I'm like, nobody's going to listen to me tell stories. You know, that not even a thing. I don't even believe that. Guys are giving me they're giving me articles about it. Like, this is what it is. I'm like, I don't understand. What does that mean? Guys that are coming in off the street are explaining it to me. They're like, no, this is what it is. I'm like a radio show? Well, kind of like a radio show, but in parts. What do you mean in parts? Is it live? Like, no idea. In the halfway house I started listening to.
That was a decade of a lot of change, a lot of innovation, a lot of updates, a lot of
13 years.
All those things.
When I was in the halfway house, I contacted a guy. So I had a friend that said there's a local guy that runs a YouTube channel. I got his email address. I sent him an email. Said, hey, I'm thinking about doing a true crime. Can I talk to you? Here's who I am. And I gave him a couple of paragraphs on my case. So he calls me. I talked to him for about 30 minutes on the phone, and he says, look, why don't you come do my podcast? I was like, okay, what's the name of the podcast? It's called Concrete. And I was like, okay. So I looked it up. I don't know how to look up anything on YouTube, right? So by the time I find it and I start scrolling through, he had some videos that had like 5,000 views, 7,000 views. So I was kind of like, nobody watches this guy's channel. Like, I'll go do it because nobody's ever going to see this. Because to me, you know, I always heard about millions of views. So I go and I do his podcast. He said, I walk in and he goes, he said, okay, how long does it take to tell your story? I said, bro, I can tell you my story in 10 minutes, in 20 minutes, in 45 minutes, in an hour or 2 hours. I said, tell me. I said, it's just a matter of how much detail you want to hear. Like, trust me, what you just heard, I scaled way down. And he said, give me the 2-hour version. All right. 2 hours and 20 minutes later, maybe 15 minutes later, we're done. Because he asked some questions. We're done. Afterward, he said, you need to start a YouTube channel, bro. He said, this is going to be big. And I was like, and I was living in someone's spare room. Like, I'm living in somebody's spare room. Like, I've been out of the halfway house a few months. Like, I can barely pay my bills. And I said, I'm not starting a YouTube channel. I don't even know how to start it. And he goes, you got a cell phone? I was like, man, come on. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I barely even use you. I can't even use my iPhone. So yeah, like he published that video and it got like, in like 3 months, it got like 1 million views. And I think it's at like 2 million views now.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was stupid because I didn't do anything. Like a year and a half went by before I started posting videos. Because by that point I realized, wow, because what happened at that point, people started it's funny, entrepreneur companies started calling me and saying, hey, will you come have lunch with us? And I was like, you know, we'll give you a couple grand if you'll just come have lunch with us. We'll fly in, put you in a hotel. It's like, are you serious? So that happened, and then mortgage these conventions or associations called me and started saying, hey, can you come out and be a keynote speaker? I don't even know what a keynote speaker is.
Yeah,
I had to look it up.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's what I do,
And,
that, the YouTube
and
and everything.
that's how you're rebuilding your life, is through the book royalties and podcasting, YouTube,
Right.
keynote speeches, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's
And then
it.
are you required? Is there any sort of like payment, repayment, and
Of
all of that?
course.
Like,
Bro, paid like $900 last month. Like every month they hit me. Sometimes it's not much. Sometimes it's 150, $200. Sometimes it's 800. Sometimes it's nine. Sometimes it's 200. It's based on how much money I bring in. My restitution payments
yeah,
are based on what I bring in.
just so it's like a percentage of whatever you make that month.
Right.
Mm. Yeah.
My probate, listen, the first year I was on probation, I was getting piss tested twice a month. My probation officer stopping by constantly, because you have to understand, the last time I was on probation, I sold $11.5 million while on probation. So they were like, that's not happening again. I was like, all right, I hear you. You're not wrong. I get it.
Yeah.
I know what you're thinking, but I'm all better now. So yeah, so they were, for the first year, it was rough. And then it got a little bit better. Now my probation officer, like, she stops by. They still come by. She came by like 2-3 weeks ago. But it's not like it was before. She comes in, we talk. She's like, "What are you doing? How's this going? When are you going to do?" Because I tell her, like, hey, my schedule, like, hey, I'm going to, Cincinnati, Ohio, or something, to do a keynote speaking. I have to ask her for permission. And so she's like, "Hey, when are you going again?" I was like, "Oh, it's this time." And she's like, "Okay." So yeah, she's cool now, because now she realizes,
How many more years of that do you have?
I actually have one more year. One
Wow.
more year, as of basically right now, because I started in early July.
That's great. Well,
We'll see.
a lot of lessons learned along the way, I'm sure. Yeah. What advice would you have, or closing thoughts would you have to, to put a cherry on top of this story?
I don't think there is a cherry on top of the story. I think, I think the problem is, like, I love telling the story, right? Like, you can see it in me. I'm arrogant. I'm narcissistic. Like, I'm an asshole. I love telling the story, but, other than the fact is, I have, I usually basically kind of say, like, people typically really say this. They say, "Oh, you only stole from the banks," and that's true, but I still have several people. I have like 4 people that lost money, right? Like, I moved into your house and I got 6 mortgages on your house. Like, it's gonna be a problem for you.
Mm.
You're gonna have to get a lawyer. Now, maybe you could do it yourself, but you're not a lawyer. You're probably just gonna get a lawyer, because you got to call the banks. You have to, you're terrified. You don't really know what your rights are. So I had some people. I had a doctor who spent, like, I think $14,000. That CPA guy, he spent like $7,000. Somebody else spent 5. Like, I think the total is like 30 grand. I owe like 30 grand to like 4 different people. But everything else is banks, But one, like, they didn't have that coming. Like, this is just some doctor living his life, doing the right thing. And his biggest mistake was just crossing my path.
Mm.
Like, he didn't do anything wrong. It's not like all the signs were there. They weren't there. I was a perfect tenant.
Mm.
So, I feel bad about that. And I think, and then and although this is a selfish thing to say, as much as joy as I get telling the story, like, I got out of prison. I was 49 then, 53 now, just turned 53. So, I got out, and no, I just turned 54. So I was 50 when I got out. So I was just a couple days later, I turned 50. So the point is that, you're 50 years old, you're starting over with nothing.
Mm.
Nothing. Someone looks up my name, like, I'm not getting a job at the bank. Who wants to hire me? So, it just, I got lucky. I'm one of the luckiest people I know, because I was able to spin this into what's turning into a career.
Right. Right.
But most people aren't going to be that lucky. Most people will commit fraud. They'll get out, they'll have a felony. By the time they get out, their wife's left them. Maybe their kids have seen them in the course of 2 or 3 years. Like if you get a sentence like mine, it's just over. Most guys like me probably get out and they hopefully the best they can hope for is maybe they end up selling cars. That's it. Like unless you want to work construction or you want to do something else, maybe you could work at FedEx. They'll hire felons. Not a lot of places hire felons, but like it's going to be tough to bounce back. And you're 50, and what do you have? Nothing. Like I always have these guys like, oh, was it worth it? No, was it worth it? Are you insane? You always have these jerk offs who say, well, yeah, it made me the man I am today. The man you are today? You're a scumbag that went to prison for 13 years, got out, and you've got 14 felonies. People, half the people just despise you. Nobody trusts you, and for good reason. You don't even have an argument. So, you can't even say, oh, you don't know me. No, well, based on what I do know, that's true. You're a scumbag. So I have every right not to, women, listen, dating, it's over. I mean, I met my wife in the halfway house.
Really?
She did 5 years for a meth conspiracy. And listen, thank God nobody would date me. Like all the horrible things that have happened, to me because of me, absolutely because of me. Like I brought everything on myself. Like luckily it's been working out. I've managed to make it work out. Like out of every woman that I dated, if you lined them all up throughout my whole life, I would pick my wife. It was the best one. Like thank God this chick wouldn't date me. I wouldn't have ended up with my wife. So all these horrible things that at the moment were like horrible, hindrances have all, like, if you can just get around them or look at the silver lining, like it's like there have been amazing, some of the worst situations I've put myself in, and the results of those have ended up being great. Like what if I had gotten to the halfway house, not tried to do the true crime thing, got a job selling cars, met some girl that would date me? I'd be married to some chick that's not the woman that I'm in love with. Probably would have just picked her because I was just happy she was dating me, and I'd be selling cars right now. Like that's not the life I wanted. That's the life I thought I was going to have, but it's certainly not the life I wanted. So I mean, I think that if I had to say what I learned is just to be super appreciative of what you have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I thought all this money was going to make me happy, and doing this was going to make me happy, and in the end, I was more miserable before I went to prison and had a ton of money than I am living paycheck to paycheck right now. And it sounds stupid because I've heard people say that before when I had money, like money doesn't mean anything. I was like, you're an idiot, But the truth is that like I'm doing great right now. I'm not really,
and I'm sure the mental stress of not, being able to sleep at night now is probably
like a baby. Now that may be because I'm in my 50s. Maybe I just you get old, you fall asleep easy, but maybe that's it. But I sleep like a baby.
Yeah.
Things are good. Things are so good at, listen, you go to prison and you all the stuff you take for advantage of, or take for advantage out here, you go to prison, you realize like, wow, like this is horrible. You have nothing. It's just you, and you're reading books, and it's loud, and people are screaming all the time. And that's if you go to a nonviolent prison. Even in the nonviolent ones, they're still stabbing each other. If you can just keep your head down and not get into fights, not get stabbed, not get hurt, you just keep your head down, you're lucky. You can just survive it and get out and just be appreciative. Listen, I got out of the halfway house. I lived in someone's spare room for 18 months. Not even in the spare room. I actually lived in the closet of the spare room because this is just kind of a makeshift house. The way it was set up, there's a really big closet. I was like, I'm sleeping in there. Oh, there's no windows in there. Like I care.
Yeah.
I've been sleeping in a place with no windows.
Just
Cozy.
nice to have a clean place to go to sleep.
I was happy to be able to watch TV. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to write down what I wanted to on a list and then have these guys kind of decide whether they were going to let you watch it or not. Listen, you've got these iPhones. It's magic. You're walking around with magic in your hand. You don't even know it.
Mm.
I hear people complain about ridiculous things. Man,
That's true.
every time I start to complain about something, I just think, bro, what are you doing? You're supposed to be in prison right now. You're supposed to be in prison.
Could be a lot worse.
Hold on. What? The what? No, because I don't go to the pool. You do. This is my wife's daughter. The only one who uses a key card to the pool and can never find it.
Tell her we say hi. So I just have one final question, just to kind of wrap up. What advice would you give to people to, let's say, avoid being the victim of stuff like this, or avoid being targeted, or kind of just any kind of tips you could give to, the real estate professionals out there, the average Joe out there, on how to not get conned, scammed, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't know. I was a perfect customer. I think that there were many times when people would see things that, maybe they didn't quite look right, but they just shrug them off. A lot of times their intuition, it's like follow your intuition. The few times that I've really gotten screwed up is not because someone caught something, but it's because they followed their intuition and they realize something's not right. Something's not right. Like I'm a big believer in intuition. So, and I think every guy or woman out there, if they've ever dated and they had the person they were with cheat on them, like every woman out there, you walk in, you slept around, you cheat on your girlfriend, and she comes and she sees you and she goes, where have you been? Like nothing changed. You came home at the same time. Everything was the same. You called her at the same time. You're acting the same, but she knows. You've done the same thing. If your girlfriend messed around, you're like, I just feel like something's not right. Nothing just I can't put my finger on it, but something's not right. And that's just intuition, man. I mean, there's just and that's the thing is, you follow your intuition. I mean, some of these things, like keep in mind too, like I always met I was like the perfect customer. 3 trade lines, the minimum. Bank account on the job for 3 years. Walked into the bank with my W-2s and pay stubs, my homeowner's insurance, with the assigners filled out to your company. Already, I already know I'm getting it. I already know I'm getting it. Here's my canceled check. Here's this. Here's this. Here's this. Like I know everything. I would actually have loan officers say, "You've been one of the best customers I've ever dealt with." I'd be like, really? So yeah, but their intuition. I think following your intuition. I think double checking things. You would pull my credit and it would say that my social security number had been issued within the last 2 years. And people would go, "That's weird." And I go, "Yeah, that is weird. Oh, that's strange." They go, "Oh well," and they keep filling out the paperwork. Like you could have made a phone call.
Yeah. Sometimes you're right. It is that simple. If something just doesn't feel right, maybe take that extra step to push on it a little bit.
Cool. Do you hear an echo?
No.
Oh, well, must be me.
Do you hear an echo? No.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I don't listen. I'm not filled with words of wisdom. Sorry.
No, that's totally good. I think that was kind of what I was, hoping to hear is just, anybody can fall for it. And if something just doesn't feel right, maybe take that extra minute to push a little deeper.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that a real customer, would be offended if you asked a few more questions or made a call. They already
Right.
expect you to call.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Well, I got to say, this has been an incredible interview, incredible story you have. For the people that do want to connect with you, how talk about the podcast, how they can find you, all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's on. Obviously, I have a YouTube channel. It's my name. It's Matthew Cox, Inside True Crime. And
Awesome.
it's on. I'm on Spotify and app. What was it called? iTunes and all of that. And I have the book. I have a book. You could put the link in the description.
Yep, we'll do that.
If anybody, I don't know who's,
Yeah, check
I
out the
never see a
book.
spike. I never see a spike. So that's why I'm just kind of like, it doesn't matter. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
So
for those that do want it, check that out. I think it's a whole series too, right? It's your story and then several others.
yeah, I wrote. I mean, I've written a bunch of synopses, which are basically like true crime stories, like you would see in Rolling Stone magazine. But I also wrote several books. I wrote, I think, like 8 books, but there's only like 7 of them that are available. But yeah, these are guys the guy Frank Amadeo that wrote my story. I mean, that helped me with legal work. I wrote his story. I wrote another guy's story that was locked up. He shouldn't be locked up. I've written a bunch. I got some. I wrote a book called Generation Oxy. I've written a bunch of books. So there's a bunch of and they're all true crime books. Like I order the documents, the Freedom of Information Act. I would do the research from inside prison because I have nothing but time.
Right.
And I interview the guys because they're in there with me. So yeah,
Well, that's very cool. Yeah, highly recommend everyone check those out. Any final thoughts before we part ways?
No, you're better at this than I am. My interviews are horrible.
Well, thank you.
I like the bull.
The bull right here. Yep.
Yeah.
Because there's 2 things we're about on this show: real estate and making money. So, we like the bulls.
Yeah.
Anyway, again, Matthew, man, really appreciate the time. This is probably one of our longest podcast episodes, but it was a great story, and I don't think there's a dull moment in the whole thing. So really appreciate your time. For those of you that have any questions, put them in the description or in the link down below. As usual, if you like money and you like real estate, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right.